The story goes that sometime in late 1828, a group of 5 or so hunters were camping in the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. During their expedition into the vast unmapped swamp, they were attacked by a large, hairy creature that was described as being between 8 to 15 feet tall. Depending on which version of the story you hear, some say all were killed while other stories have a sole survivor. In the no survivor stories, another party found the remains of the camp and reported what they saw. In some of the survivor stories, the severely wounded hunter made it back to civilization on his own and lived long enough to tell his tale. In others, another party of hunters rescued him, but he didn't live long enough to make it back to a safe location due to a second attack or other misfortune. The sole survivor living to tell the tale is the most common one you'll hear, though. Many newspapers covered the story at the time, and it got repeated over the years throughout the country. After all, such sensationalist stories sold newspapers, much like clickbait blog posts and videos do these days. Who doesn't love a good monster story? But, what evidence do we have from nearly 200 years ago that this event really occurred? Some of the evidence is based on the investigation after the attack. Of course, documentation from this time is scant and often incomplete, so we have to take it for what it is. According to these records, the survivor's wounds were quite real and his clothes were torn and bloody. Under questioning by authorities and newspapermen, he told a consistent story about the attack, even though he was under pressure to blame the attack on rogue native tribes who were rumored to be hiding in the deep swamp. The only known predators in the area that could have killed the other hunters were alligators and bears. But, the wounds evidence did not suggest a gator attack. Bears were another possibility, but they generally avoided large groups of people. There are Native American legends, primarily from the Creek tribe, that mention a mysterious group of gigantic people who live in the deep swamp. The Creek were said to avoid venturing into areas of the swamp where this group lived. This legend predates the attack since it appears in a travelogue book written in 1806. Could one of the men read this book and embellished a tall tale from it? Maybe, but we have to remember literacy wasn't common at the time. Back then, only about 20% of the US population could read. Also, a book would have been a luxury purchase for a poor hunter even if he could read. If someone owned a book back then, it was most likely a family Bible. Another piece of evidence was from other people who lived on the edge of the swamp. That year was particularly dry and had made it easier to venture deeper into the Okefenokee. They had mentioned that they had seen massive footprints in the exposed mud bank during one of their hunting trips. This spooked them and they retreated from the swamp. The group of hunters who were subsequently attacked heard the story and decided to check it out for themselves. One thing that gets mentioned by some when looking at the evidence is, why didn't the hunters just shoot the attacking Bigfoot? While it may seem a logical thing to do for us today, with the flintlock rifles the hunters carried, you didn't leave them loaded. The powder could get wet, causing a misfire. Black powder could accidentally ignite, causing a dangerous explosion. So, firearms were unloaded unless one was actively hunting. A skilled marksman could load the weapon within 20 to 30 seconds, but that assumes they're ready to load and not caught by surprise. According to the account, the party of hunters had prepared their camp, secured their weapons and settled in for the evening when the creature attacked. Some of the varied accounts mention that the men did manage to load their rifles and fire, but either the bullets had no effect, bounced off, or they missed. Missing is something easy to do with these rifles, especially if shooting in panic mode. Another factor that could cause a projectile to bounce off is that when quickly loading a black powder weapon during a sudden attack, it was common to underload the powder. A weakly powered round could cause it not to penetrate. Another version of the tale has the men successfully hitting their target, killing the creature after it had done the same to several members of the party. The surviving men, or man, fled in fear of further attacks, leaving the body of the creature and their fallen comrades to the swamp. The variation of the different accounts certainly casts some doubt on the story. We really don't know much about the men involved or the newspaper reporters who wrote and rewrote the story. Are they credible? We have no way of knowing. Reporters and writers during that time and since could be giving an honest account, an exaggeration of a real event, or just making up a sensational tale to sell more papers. Of course, content creators today don't do the same thing, right? Right? We do know, however, the Okefenokee Swamp is a wild and dangerous area. Even today, people encounter deadly trouble there with the elements as well as real creatures like alligators and venomous snakes. There are also still locals who will spin tall tales for you about skunk apes, mysterious lights and such paranormal things being in the swamp. The first time I heard this Bigfoot story was from a local who told the tale and ended it with the punchline, "The beast began pulling the man's leg, just like I'm pulling yours." So, what really happened in the Okefenokee Swamp in 1828? We may never know for sure. In any case, it remains one of the earliest famous Bigfoot encounters in U.S. history. It captured people's fears and imaginations back then just like it does today. The story continues to be retold, just like I'm doing here. My own take, having been to the Okefenokee several times, is that it's a naturally spooky place on its own. It's easy to get freaked out there, especially in the twilight hours as the sun goes down. But, I'm more likely to blame a rogue bear for the attack, if there was an attack at all. What do you think? Was this story credible or not? Let me know in the comments and watch some of our other videos on paranormal events in swamps.